Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Volt's weekly appointment to discuss what is going on with the COVID-19 crisis. If this is the first time you tune in with us, I give you my most warm welcome. My name is Francesca Romana d'Antuono. I am the city lead of Volt Firenze, which is a local chapter of Volt Europa. I'm also your host for tonight's live debates. Every week, we discuss a different aspect linked to both the health, economic, and perhaps political crisis we're facing due to the pandemic. If you missed out on the first two episodes of this show, just reach out to us and we will be sharing the link, or simply go to Volt Firenze Facebook page. Small recap of the rules to this session. You can ask questions by commenting the streaming of Volt Firenze, Volt Europa, or Volt Italia Facebook pages, and I will be more than happy to read it and redirect it to our guests. So this week, we want to tackle a burning topic. What is going on with the EU economy in this post-pandemic world? Or better, is there actually space for a unitary action in this European Union? In order to do so, I have with me some very special guests, which I'm very proud to introduce to you. First of all, Pietro Panizza. Pietro is a PhD researcher in economics at the European University Institute. Paolo Brunori, who is a researcher in political economy here in Florence. Andi Shehu, who is a PhD researcher in economic history and Volt Italia President. And last but not least are Giulia Pastorella, a digital policy expert and a member of the national board of two Italian progressive parties, Europa and Azione. So let me shortly recap, frame a little the situation we're in at the moment before giving space to our guests. This week, the Eurogroup and the European Council had very important meeting during which they were supposed to come out with a final decision of what to do to face this crisis. Unfortunately, this decision was not taken, and everything has been postponed for 2 weeks. In the meantime, South and Central European economies, 9 countries in particular, are asking for a collective response to the crisis, which could be in the form of corona bonds, whereas Germany and the Netherlands, most of all, have rejected this possibility. This has caused a little disruption within the continent. We had the president of Portugal, Antonio Costa, saying that the words expressed by the finance minister of Holland were repulsive. At the same time, we had Ursula von der Leyen saying that the corona bonds are just a slogan, and tension is rising. This is why our speech today, our discussion today, wants to tackle, of course, the economic implication of this crisis, but most of all, what's the political response to that? So I would ask, first of all, Pietro, our guest, to give a little a vision of what is the economic background of all of this, since this is your field of expertise. Pietro, please.
Yes, thank you for having me, and also for a chance to meet with some people in these days, which is worth gold, I would say. Yeah, so as I talk first, I would start from the title you gave to the talk, what is going to happen to the EU economy. Yeah, the first short and easy answer is that an economic crisis is coming, is on the way. Perhaps will be even clearer once, luckily, the containment measures will be lifted. So yeah, there is broad consensus that among economists that 2020 will see a global recession. So it means that the world GDP will shrink, unemployment will soar, and so on. Probably it's not even, I mean, respect to the past crisis, not even very useful to talk about the signals about the crisis, because it's, I mean, we all see that the pictures of empty cities all around the world, so it's probably obvious. Regarding the size of the drop, like how much the income will fall in the world and in Europe through the year. There are not yet reliable predictions, there is still a lot of uncertainty, both on the development of the pandemic and, as you were saying, Francesca, on the political decisions that have, the European Central Bank has intervened, but there are yet important political decisions to be taken at the European level. The ECB, I think the last prediction of the ECB was a drop of 4% this year, but is very unreliable, as it will probably be much higher than this. What we can say, I've read a few days ago, Gurinchas, which is an economist at Berkeley, a macroeconomist, who was making like some simple computations and basically was predicting that with 1 month, if you have 1 month with 50% less economic activity and 25% less in the subsequent months. So basically is imagining that there is a hard lockdown for 1 month and then in the next month there is like a bit less. You lose 6.5% of the GDP. And if you go on in the next month, so another month with 25% less, you easily reach 10%, a 10% drop. So, this is, of course, there is also a lot of uncertainty of how it will be when the containment measures will be lifted. So how easy will it be to get back to business? Some countries are already planning, like all these situations where the young people go back first, then old people are put in quarantine for longer time, and so on. What this drop is made for, of course, is not only related to the containment measures. So it's not only that firms are forced not to produce, but so of course, if we think about tourism or restaurants, it is also made of the fact that even people whose income does not change. So, for instance, I'm working from home, but my wage does not change, and I will probably not lose my job. They change their consumption decisions as people, even though their income does not change, they probably save more because a family member loses job, or simply because as uncertainty increases, you do more precautionary savings. And of course, also firms postpone investment until the situation clears. So yeah, I would say that like a modern economy is a very complex system that you cannot switch it off and on. You cannot switch it off for a month and then switch it on back and it goes and it works as before. It is a complex system where the decisions and the expectations of each and every agent plays a part, and of course this is why something that initially is not a huge drop, it may easily turn into a long recession, a long depression. And this is also more or less the sense of Mario Draghi article on the Financial Times a few days ago. So, and with that, I think I would pass it to the others. And I mute myself.
All right, thank you very much. So what you described is basically that there is going to be a recession, probably, and income fall is not, like the prediction that have been made so far, are not reliable. We expect a very, very big drop. Let me tell you that here we focus, of course, on the European Union, but the impact of this crisis in emerging markets has been devastating so far. So what is coming in the next months doesn't look very bright, and that we are gonna be basically trapped in a sort of vicious circle because we are gonna be the expenses and investments are going to be lower. The economic capacity of citizens, of government, is going to be lower, and so this is of course not a a very bright future we're expecting, but we must keep faith and discuss in order to find a common solution. So first of all, I remind everybody who is watching this to ask questions on the comments of this video. I want to say hello because I see friends from Germany, Denmark, and Holland online. Hello, thank you for following. After your introduction, Pietro, I would give the word to Paolo. Paolo, you are a researcher in political economy, but also you've been active in politics. So perhaps you're the link between these two words, and you would like to give us your perspective.
Yes, thanks. Thanks for this opportunity, and thanks for also for giving me the opportunity to get out from my usual business of staying with my children full time these days. So thanks. So as Pietro and as you said, we are going to face a slowdown of the global economy, so in principle, when the lockdown started, I think the policymakers were imagining that they could freeze for a few weeks the economy and then restart it. Okay, and so you can make this estimate of a drop over 3%, 4% due to this temporaneous stop of the economy. But then, first, because the lockdown is not going to last for a few weeks, but for more, and also because the restriction will be, many of the restrictions will stay for months, you realize that this is not possible. So what is going to happen, I think, is that, first of all, this crisis will destroy the most fragile businesses around the world. This is particularly frightening for economies like the economies of the Western countries and European economies especially, that are not among the most dynamic economies in the world. So they have many fragile sectors that were already under pressure for strong competition from emerging countries. But the most important thing, I think, is that after this crisis, the relative power of different economies in the world will change. So if, and I say if, the numbers that we are receiving from Eastern countries, especially from Asia, from China and South Korea, if they are real, so if the number of deaths and their ability to manage the COVID pandemic is real, then it's clear that the future. So we are going to see an acceleration of what was going to happen anyway, but maybe in decades. This is going to be strongly accelerated in the next few months and in the next years, and we will find ourselves in a completely different position in the global economy. When I say we, I mean the European countries in general and Southern European countries especially. And then we are going to see second, third, and fourth order effects that generally are not well modeled by economists, that will basically affect any aspect of our lives. My wife is working in a hospital, and what you see in hospitals is that, of course, everybody and all resources are used and are prioritized to fight against COVID-19. But the problem is that people is sick and get other problems, and they are simply not treated at the moment. So they are expecting a huge wave of stress and wars in the incoming months as second and third order effect of what they are doing now to combat the COVID-19. But let me get, if I have a few seconds more, let me get to the response that European countries are unfortunately giving as country and not as a united Europe. So what I expect from Europe is that the strategy that they will decide eventually to implement is going to be too late, so it's going to be too slow, and it's going to be insufficient for many countries. And this will be especially the case for Italy and also for Spain and probably for other countries. The reason is that there are a lot of asymmetries going on here, and I don't know why many have been talking about a symmetric shock in this case. They say, no, this is not going to be a problem to find an agreement in how to respond to COVID-19 because this is a symmetric shock that will affect all countries. But this is not the case. First of all, because the healthcare system differs. Second, because the force and the speed of the epidemic is different and has affected for the moment a few countries as bad as in Italy. Second, because the ability to spend money is completely different in some countries and in others. So what I expect, unfortunately, is that eventually European institutions will respond, and they will, maybe they will not call it Corona bond, they will call it something else, but there will be the European Central Bank or other institutions buying the debt of few countries, but this will be not enough for some countries like Italy, and it will be too slow because they should have started to act now. And so, unfortunately, I think what we should do as Italians and as Europeans is to keep on pressing European institutions to do more and to act as fast as possible, but at the same time start to find ways to respond to this crisis. And for example, for the Italian case, I think we do need immediately a universal basic income, temporary for a few months, because we have to consider that in Italy we have about 3 million people working in the formal sector. These people are not protected. Okay, 3 million people in the south. A vast part of the labor force is not covered by standard social protection measures. So we do have to respond with a very simple to implement policies like a temporary universal basic income, and we have to pay with our money immediately. And one way to do it is to overnight to tax the wealth of the country, which is huge in Italy. At least is about 10,000 billion euro. So we can tax them at 1% overnight, and then we can provide money to survive for another 3 months to all Italians for this period. So we have to respond now, because every week you wait is going to be very dangerous. I think economists should avoid repeating what policymakers have done for the health situation. So we have been waiting until the symptoms and the effect of the epidemic were clearly visible, but we knew that it was a matter of time, and we should have acted much before.
All right, Paolo, thank you very much for this. I would love to hear our guests' opinion on the idea of a universal temporary basic income. Paolo referred a lot to Italy because, of course, he is Italian, but let me remind you that this conversation is supposed to really be between members of the European Union. So everybody who is online, give us your comments, your question, or your perspective on this. Also, you mentioned the fact that this should have been a symmetric shock, but the countries do not have the same ability to respond to this crisis. I believe that is very much true, but I also believe that this is really a moment where we can finalize our union. I see a lot of possibility in this crisis, but it's not about my opinion today, it's about our guests. So I'm going to introduce our next speaker, who is Giulia Pastorella. Giulia is an expert in cybersecurity policy and has been a candidate to the European elections with a progressive Italian party, which is Più Europa. Più Europa, for those who are listening and are not Italian speakers, means more Europe. So, I mean, it states pretty clear what the party is really all about. But perhaps as all people who actually are convinced about the importance of the union today, we want to ask for a different kind of union. I'll leave the word to Giulia to reply to this.
Right. A different kind of union. Not sure a different one, but certainly this crisis, rather similarly to previous crises we've gone through, has shown how incomplete the European project is. And in particular, I wouldn't just say on the economic side of things. Of course, you can't have a monetary policy without a proper fiscal policy, and we all know that. But I think it has also shown how damaging it is if you don't have competences at European level in the healthcare space. And it doesn't mean, making national health system a European national health system, but certainly the fact that the European Union can only coordinate and not do much more, it has shown all of the limitations of a European Union, that it's half-baked and half-built. So assuming that the European project goes from crisis to crisis, what we need to be careful in this particular crisis is to avoid all of the, I wouldn't say there were steps. I mean, they were not necessarily wrong in terms of what they did with the Euro crisis, but they certainly lacked, in the eyes of a lot of European citizens, the legitimacy. They were not understood properly, and there was a lot of divisions between member states back then in 2010, 2011, and that has led to a backlash in the past years. Nationalists, populists, they're all coming to the forefront of politics. And the risk that I see with this crisis and the way the economic side of things is being handled at European level is exactly very similar dynamics. Whether we consider this a symmetric shock in its maybe cause, I mean, the virus is everywhere. I tend to agree that it is having different effects on different countries, but I don't think it's about the shock. It's about the pre-existing conditions of these countries. That means that their response and the way they're living the crisis is slightly different. So the egoism, as it were, of member states, we see it with, keeping masks for themselves or not sending them, et cetera, is really being taken up by all the media, and it's creating a lot of reputational problems for the European Union and for the European project. What I think this crisis has also shown in economic terms, but maybe broadly than just saying, we're going to go into recession, and we all know that. But I think it has also shown some positive sides, which is that our welfare state and our, especially our health systems, compared to, say, the US model, is handling this probably better, hopefully. And this should make us think long-term what kind of model we want this European Union and the member states to be built on. So I think it's a moment of reflection also in terms of how do we use our resources in the economy? Do we put more resources for pensions or for healthcare system or for education, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a time of analysis also for national governments, who of course have to tackle and face the immediate crisis and the immediate economic problems, but I think could also take the opportunity to review some of their priorities. And in this respect, we mentioned, or Paolo mentioned, the informal sector, the black market. I would also mention maybe illegal immigrants. These are problems that predate the coronavirus crisis, and they haven't been dealt with. We're talking about overcrowded prisons, and you name it, all of the migrants on the border, et cetera, et cetera. So all of these are not, to my mind, they're not necessarily issues that need to be tackled on a one-off. We're going to give you some money and everything is going to be all right. Yes, we need to make sure that no one goes hungry. I completely agree. But I would be careful with using this crisis as an excuse to accept or to even kind of make it somehow formal and acceptable some of the distortions that exist in some economies, in particular in the Italian economy, when we think about the informal sector and the black market. One last point, maybe the economic tensions are also giving rise to social tensions, of course, and these social tensions are then drifting into almost authoritarian tendencies within the households, where people are operating kind of surveillance models on each other, etc. And we should be careful about that as well. The fact that that there's a clear economic struggle shouldn't lead to forgetting democratic practices. I mean, Italian parliament was not working for a couple of weeks, which I thought was absolutely ridiculous given the importance of the economic measures that were being passed. So we have to be careful that the economic priorities don't trump completely our democratic values and democratic norms. And then maybe one last point before I close. I think when we think of the economies and how they're going to go into recession, etc., what worries me most, apart from the recession and the massive debts and whether there'll be ESM credit lines or Corona bonds or Euro edge of Treasury, whatever option is going to be taken eventually at EU level, we have to remember that up until the crisis, we were part of a globalized economy where value chains were global, et cetera, et cetera. Now, if Italy reopens before Germany, I mean, we might reopen, but we're not going to be in complete autarky, economically speaking. So we need to make sure that the slow reopening of the economy in whichever form is going to be coordinated, because of course we're completely interconnected. So when certain governments talk about, oh, we're going to do this in 1 week or 2 weeks, etc., if there's no coordinated reopening, as it were, of the economy, then this is going to be completely pointless. So making sure that once again, that I guess the consequence of the crisis, it might be good to rethink value chains in terms of making sure that not all strategic manufacturing happens in one place. So diversification of the value chain, etc., is all good. But I'm kind of worried that the default option at the end of the crisis will be we need to renationalize, we need to kind of making sure that we're independent in all sectors of the economy. And I think paradoxically, my conclusion from this crisis is precisely no, we need to make sure that things don't stop at borders, because then it's a mess. But I'm kind of worried, and I'll leave you on a negative note, as it were. I'm kind of worried that if Europe doesn't, as they were saying before, if Europe doesn't come up with a solution quickly, a solution that is not only acceptable for everyone, no moral hazard, blah, 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 but it's also democratically, so the narrative should be that of legitimacy and European unity, etc. If they don't manage that, then I'm worried that the economic crisis will also turn into a sort of balkanization again of the European economy, which completely defeats the purpose of the entire European project.
Thank you very much, Giulia. Basically, it's make it or break it. Like this crisis is really the moment where we decide if we want to be a union or not, because as you correctly mentioned, and I really loved you said it, there is no border strong enough. We are interconnected. That is a fact. At date, there is a problem, for example, with the agriculture, because foreigner workers are not allowed to arrive in the countries where they usually arrive for seasonal work. And so we're facing a problem even with that. This means that everything is really interconnected, and we cannot still believe that we can be autonomous on ourselves. I totally agree with you, and I share with you the concern that this might happen. But I'm guessing it's a matter on, first of all, what really happens. So really, if the response to this is strong and tempestive enough and fast enough, and also about how you narrate that. But enough with that, I'm going to introduce to you the last speaker of our session today. The last speaker is Andi Shehu. Andi is the president of Volt Italia, and I love to say this, right? Is actually not born in Italy, which makes him the first president of an Italian party to not having been born on our national territory. And also, he isn't even born in the European Union. But in Albania, it's yesterday news that the discussion about Albania and Macedonia entering the European Union again has been resumed. This is very good news that I want to share with you. But jokes apart, of course, Andi is fully Italian and European also, but also a very good speaker when it comes to tackle economical and political crisis. So I'll leave the word to you.
Thanks a lot, and thanks a lot everybody for joining today. It was what I heard was really interesting. I wanted to start by tackling some of the points that others have mentioned. For example, Francesca before, she mentioned the fact that there is a crisis in emerging markets, and I think this we are ignoring this so far because we are having huge problems in dealing with our own problems. But as we heard from Giulia, we are all interconnected. So emerging markets are interconnected with us as well. So the problem that is going to haunt them is going to bite us back if we don't deal with that. And to highlight how big this is at the moment, it is yesterday that the managing director of the IMF said that already now 80 countries across the world have asked the IMF for help. And she has, the IMF has calculated that we will need at minimum 2.5 trillion US dollars intervention from the, let's say, the countries in the north towards the south to halt the crisis there. So we are talking about immense resources to be mobilized, not only to deal with the problems we've been talking so far right now, the problems in Europe, but we just need to remember that we live in a globalized world and we cannot ignore the rest. But I'd like now to move on to Europe and to move on to what has been happening there. And reading today's economists and the politicians and whoever is talking, it seems like there is a dichotomy between economic policy and health policy. I absolutely think that dichotomy is wrong, and the two things should go together and should be considered together, because you cannot have one without the other. So we will have to face in the future a problem of economic opening and closing, as Giulia said, and we will have to coordinate. But this cannot happen without taking into consideration what the health repercussions will be. So the two problems go hand in hand, and ignoring them or making it sound like we can either have one or the other, I think it's wrong, because they both can create huge problems for us. And the third element I wanted to touch is what has been the huge discussion right now in Europe. It is about what kind of intervention we should have, whether we should have an intervention through the ESM, European Stability Mechanism, or whether we can have Eurobonds. And I think this has to be discussed because it's a really important and pressing matter for particularly Southern Europe. And I do think that there is a big difference in using one system or the other, because the ESM would, as it is conceived right now, would subject the countries in Southern Europe, Italy, Spain, and Portugal maybe, to fiscal supervision. And that is absolutely not the correct way to go about it in this moment, because it was no one's fault that this crisis happened. And as Paolo said earlier, the capacity to react is incredibly different from country to country. So even if the shock is exogenous, so it's external, and it seems to be the same shock, it's actually not, because every country has different healthcare capacities and different economic capacities. So this is the reason why we absolutely need to go for mutualized bonds, what are called Eurobonds or Corona bonds, to kickstart again the economy. And I want here to make an important distinction, because I think a lot of people think of the Eurobonds as something that will help to stop the health crisis. That is probably not the case, because that is for more immediate instruments to be deployed to stop the health crisis. But what the Eurobonds will ensure is that there will be something to reconstruct the economy after the crisis, the health crisis has at least passed in the first part, so that there will be a coordinated economic European effort to rebuild the whole European economy. And this is the positive side that I see in this crisis, that I want to say in the end, that this is what is called by many people a Hamiltonian moment, which means the moment when in the US, the federal state stepped in, and instead of dealing through the states, the federal
All right, I think there is an issue with Andi's connection. We're gonna try to see if he can.
Government reach directly to the citizens, and this is what you. Can you hear me now?
All right, wait a second. I hear you here and there. Try to talk now.
Yes, can you hear me now?
All right, we can hear you. Can you resume a little?
Yes. So I said this is the moment when you can dive into this possibility and create a direct link between Europe and
I believe there's something wrong again. And if you can just like block the video and try to connect only via voice, because you keep falling, unfortunately. Try again.
All right, I will try only with the voice. So I was saying that there are no legacy issues associated with the rising fiscal cost of fighting COVID-19. There is no moral hazard involved in helping countries running huge deficits to avoid the huge death tolls, and rescue their collapsing economies. So this is the reason for Europe to step in and to get us to another level. And that would be it for me. Thank you.
All right, I'm very sorry your connection wasn't very good. I hope people are able to understand your very interesting speech. From what I understood, it was very, very interesting. But since it's already 7:40, I'm going to go on with the questions and avoid my commentary. I know you were looking for it, but I'll leave the word to our public. So the first question was actually for Pietro and Andi, and it was about Corona bonds. So whether they are a good idea or not, I mean, Andi really expressed this opinion strongly. And what about the EU rejection of that proposal? Will or could the Corona bonds create inflation in the Eurozone? I don't know which one of you want to reply. Perhaps, Pietro, you go first, and then we'll see if Andi's connection is good enough.
Yes, okay. Yeah, I think, because as Andi has already introduced, there are there is consensus that there need to be a big fiscal and monetary policy will have to play a big role in the crisis, as usual. I think the Corona bond, so with that, I think we mean like a big issuance of this so-called Euro bond, an European instrument of debt that is issued to pay all the unemployment benefits across Europe, and also to keep alive firms that that are efficient but they risk to go bust. I think I think it is probably the right solution. It is also what is suggested by Mario Draghi and also Tabellini. There is a political problem, and I also agree with what Andi said about the moral hazard problem, and also Paolo was mentioning this, which is basically the fact that when we had the Euro crisis in 2011, it was an endogenous crisis in the sense that the classic case is like Greece, running too much deficit, cheating on the budget, and then entering into a sovereign crisis. So of course, the argument, especially of Nordic countries, was if we bail out you now, like if we save you, you're going to misbehave again. But like in this case, it's like a, you know, an asteroid eating Earth. Like nobody could. I mean, so what I wanted to add to that is that, I mean, why EU is why there is some resistance to that. I mean, I think it's a political problem, because if we have a Eurobond, it means that really it would mean that the Italian and the Greek and the Dutch government are basically issuing the same debt instrument. So the bond issued by the Greek debt will be the same as a Dutch one, as a Dutch government one. So of course the Nordic countries will hardly accept that this will come without any other sort of guarantee, you know, because if we issue the same instrument with the same level of risk, but then you are not as reliable as I am, it is like you know, if I take out a loan with someone that is not very trustworthy, and you know, I want to monitor my mate in a sense, you know. So I think it's a difficult political problem. I hope that eventually they will. I mean, I hope they will find an agreement on this, but we have to. I mean, we have to consider that the concerns of the Netherlands and part of the German ruling class are, I think, understandable in that, because we are doing something big together.
All right, thank you very much. Andi, I don't know if you have recollected your connection and you want to add something. If not, I think Giulia wanted to do so.
Yeah, just wanted to add another element which adds.
Just one last, because the question was also asking whether there is a problem with inflation, but I mean, if these bonds will be issued with a very long expiration, like 50. Someone said even 100 years. There and you know, we are like we have the risk of entering the worst crisis probably since 1929. I mean, the main risk is deflation rather than inflation. So there is no. So I don't think that is the concern also of the Nordic countries. The problem is that they don't want us to. I mean, it's the usual thing. You know, we issue a bond together, but then we keep our promises and you don't.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you for this. Giulia, you were saying something. Please go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to build on what Pietro was saying, which is absolutely right. But I think the resistance also comes from more formal aspects of the process. That is that while with ESM-backed solutions, or they were even thinking of the European Investment Bank as another solution, if we went for something completely new like the Corona bonds, there would need to be treaty change. And my understanding, but maybe our German friends can confirm or not, is that there would even be a problem with the German constitution in that respect. So I think on top of the moral resistance, you know, the typical Nordic versus southern countries, etc., there might also be some actual formal issues that would make this process longer than some of the other options, like, you know, the various credit lines based on the ESM, or a beefed up version of the ESM, which I think is the more likely option, and other ones. But that's, you know, I might be wrong.
Thank you. So we ask our German listeners to please clarify on that. Andi, the question was also directed to you. I don't know if you want to add something.
Yes, thank you. But just very shortly. So I agree completely with what Pietro said about inflation in the end. So inflation is absolutely not the issue. We've been trying to target inflation just below 2% and not managing to do that. So we are not even reaching our target as far as inflation goes. So there is at the moment no risk of inflation, and there is a problem of our economic models and what we had before not working. So we don't know what should or how to reach the target of inflation. As far as what Giulia said, very interesting about the German constitution, and the German constitution has been very vocal that fiscal policy should be integral to So every state should have a proper functioning fiscal policy. And this is exactly one point. If we use the ESM as it is designed right now, Spain and Italy will not have a sovereign fiscal policy, which would be against what the German Constitutional Court are ruling for Germany. That would be a very interesting thing to discuss, I think. And I would add on top of that, that it doesn't really matter that much in the sense that in a moment of crisis is where you try new things when models don't work, that models that you had previously don't work. For instance, one proposal that has been floating around is that the countries who are in favor of Eurobonds, they just, which at the moment seem to be 9 or 14, depending on how much they agree with each other, should just jointly create a bond together and then ask the ECB to buy this bond. So completely going around the problem of issuing it together with 27 countries. That would be an interesting way to have Europe with 2 speeds, I think. And I will stop there.
Thank you very much. Yeah, that is. No, I you know what, I of course I'm not a big fan of crisis in general, but again, I really believe we have opportunities within this one. But I'm gonna move on to the next question, who is for Paolo. So Paolo, what are the main pillars EU is focusing on to design a new version of the economy? Precisely what I was commenting about. Is there a plan to re-employ the people that are going to lose their job in the next months? Paolo, if you want to reply to that.
Yes, unfortunately, we have no plan at the moment. That's the problem. But I think one aspect that is not sufficiently stressed is that the first thing you need to do now is to give money to people. Now, you can't wait because there are people that can't pay their rent. There are people that can't pay the money they owe to professionals. And you need to give money to people in order to avoid an excessive destruction of the productive assets in Europe, especially in Southern Europe. Then, of course, you have to focus on strategic sectors, which would imply a change in the paradigm. So we should probably start to follow what in Asia has been done in the 70s and in the 80s. So focusing on strategic sectors, protect them, feed them, help them, and avoid excessive competition from outside. And this should be a European plan, not a national plan of development. But this needs time, need expertise, need studies, and it's something that we should start to talk about, but it can be implemented only in the incoming months and years. What are the sectors we should focus on? Of course, the most dynamic sectors, but I would like to suggest also that this crisis is for Europe and for the globe in general, a chance to change their development model, making it sustainable. Because we don't have to forget that even if Pietro said that this is an exogenous shocks, there are many that suggest that this shock is not exogenous, and that this kind of virus are one of the consequences of climate changes that we are creating. And we have to underline that this is one of the shocks. So this is one of the typical Taleb would call it a black swan. Okay, but black swan are so many that we have to expect in the future to have other black swan. So one thing we should do is to start a new plan of development similar to the Marshall Plan, because the level of destruction will be not too far away from what was World War II, And I believe that this Marshall Plan, this Marshall European Plan, should be focusing on sustainable technologies, on sustainable future. I guess that if Europe decides to spend money that would be from a larger part coming from richer Europe, and this is something that we have to admit, that this plan, this money, this euro bond, this whatever, are money that at a certain point should be transferred from richer part of the continent to the poorer part of the continent. So if Europe will be able to make this big step and become a social Europe, then this plan could be the beginning of a new Europe. And I think really this is something we should hope and fight for.
Thank you, Paolo. We've been tackled before about something you said. So the fact that this pandemic is not completely not linked to our economies or to the way we live. You refer to climate change. Apparently, pandemics are a lot linked to deforestation. But this is topic for another discussion we can have some other time. On the other hand, I believe that with exogenous shock, it is just a way to refer to the fact that this has hit people independently of their specific country or behavior, but of course their specific country or behavior has affected the way they can counteract within this crisis, as we see, for example, in the US. Some of you already mentioned this before. There is a very, very big increase in contagion over there, and the healthcare system, their healthcare model is, of course, opens very dark scenarios when it comes to face such a crisis. But yeah, also about the income and giving money to the people, I would like some of our guests to perhaps reply or comment on that. But we only have 20 minutes, so yes, please do so. But in the meantime, when you think I'm gonna read the next question we have, we are really having a lot of questions coming from the public, so thank you very much for all of you who are listening to this. Next question would be for Andi. Somebody is asking, what is the position of Volt Germany about Eurobond? And so I don't speak for Volt Germany, but I'm a member of it. We are a pan-European party, and so our policies are agreed across Europe, not as a national parties. What's the whole point of being involved? That's the whole point of being involved, is it not? I don't know if you got the question, or if you can comment on Volt Germany position on the Eurobond. I believe you can.
All right, I'll be very brief. There is already a statement in the page of Volt Denmark summarizing Volt Germany and Volt Netherlands position as well, which is at the moment in favor of Eurobonds. But we are having a discussion internal right now to go out with a common position that will be shared across all Volt chapters, as the second comment, which I think is from a different person, says. So at the moment, some of us have moved ahead because the timing of political answers needs to be fast, but we have moved within what are our policies. And because the stance of Volt, generally speaking, is in favor of a federal Europe, that automatically implies that we will have to issue common debt. So this is there is no federal union without a common debt. I don't know of any, at least.
Thank you very much. That was very specific about Volt. Again, I encourage our guests, if they want to comment on the questions I direct to the others. As far as the next question concerns, this is for Giulia. So Giulia, we're seeing many large companies step in and help where they can. Do you think this crisis will change the landscape of corporate social responsibility post-pandemic?
Oh, that is an excellent question, because I've been thinking about this a lot, especially in the context of a specific, I won't say the name, but a specific luxury brand that was praised for giving a lot of money as a donation, so in terms of charity, but then had to lay off quite a few people immediately afterwards in the context of the crisis. So I see a paradox here, whereby corporate reputation might be so important that you end up doing big splashes, PR splashes, but then afterwards you have to deal with the actual reality. So I think there's two aspects to it. So one is to distinguish where companies have taken corporate social responsibilities more seriously and have changed their attitude to it. And I think this is a trend that is not due to the virus. It's been ongoing for the past, I would say, maybe 5-6 years, certainly in the world of tech. The reason being that there's lots of surveys, like the Pew survey, if you know of it. They show that consumers are increasingly looking at companies' positions on various issues, civil liberties, et cetera, when making their decisions, not only to invest, but also to purchase as a regular consumer. So both on the stock market, as it were, as on the regular market, I think the positioning of the company on ethical issues, civil issues, how serious they are about corporate social responsibility was something that was coming. And certainly in this crisis, there's also been a rethinking of the relationship between governments and multinationals, big corporations. So after a honeymoon period, I think in the 90s, then there came the time where they were seen as the evil of the world. That was mainly during the crisis, especially the financial sector, but also the tech sector was very attacked, etc. Now in the crisis, there's a sudden realization that maybe they can do good. In particular, I'm talking about my own sector, the digital sector. All of a sudden, instead of being the evil GAFA companies, they are the ones having all of the data that we need to track and trace and all the rest of it. So I see this shift where maybe at the end of the crisis, I guess to support what Francesca was saying, let's look at the positive sides. Maybe one positive side will be that the cooperation, the public-private sector cooperation, will be revalued as something that can be achieved without being at a constant war between governments and the private sector. I wouldn't go as far as doing what China has done during the crisis, which is basically to use the private sector as an arm of the state to do whatever they needed to do, be it surveillance, be it very fast sort of manufacturing of whatever they needed. So I wouldn't go as far, but I would certainly think that the mix of an increased corporate social responsibility, their role within the crisis, and government's reliance on them, as unhealthy as it might be in some cases, I think will give rise to a rethinking of the relationship between the private and the public sector, in particular with big corporations.
Thank you very much, Giulia. I work in pharmaceuticals, so I'm an expert in being considered the devil incarnated. And I agree with you on one end. On the other, I would argue that the relationship between the state and the private sector has always been a little unfair. I think perhaps, Andi, I kind of know you, so I think you want to comment on this, but I'm not forcing you to do so. On the other hand, it is true that what we are facing now is changing a lot, also the way we live. So as said, I work in pharmaceutical, for example, and we've seen within this month across Europe a big jump in the use of technology for interaction with healthcare providers, which is the big challenge of this sector, because it's kind of slow in this sense compared to other sectors. But anyway, there is a second question for you, Giulia. We have 15 minutes still to go. The question would be, an approach based on control of travel and activities rather than a complete lockdown could be the way to tackle future pandemic crises. My thoughts go to South Korea approach, for example. I'd like your opinion on privacy and security.
Wow. So this is a massive question, and I've discussed it in several other webinars over the past days. Maybe two quick comments so that we can leave room for the other speakers as well. First of all, the South Korea model, as it were, worked because it was done early on, because of a lot of specific circumstances linked to the culture of the place, linked to the availability of certain technologies, linked to lots of different factors. So I wouldn't say that that model is necessarily what is needed now for most countries in Europe. The privacy and security debate is not a zero-sum game in my mind, because there are ways to ensure that you can do all of the track and tracing without necessarily undermining the privacy rights that we have in Europe. I'll give you a very quick example. You could have a Bluetooth-based system for track and tracing, which would mean that your device tracks all of the other Bluetooth that it finds around you. So Bluetooth, why is it better than GPS? Because it's less battery consuming, because it can be anonymized very easily, and it's much more precise in terms of the relative positioning of people. And this could be done then you could have an alert system whereby people are notified of having come into contact with someone without necessarily telling them who it is. So all I'm saying is that there are ways in which this could be, the technology, I guess, specific technologies could be used in an anonymized way, which is very important for privacy, but also it's already being used in aggregated terms. So all the telecom companies are handing over aggregated data to monitor populations and how they're moving, etc., without infringing on any privacy rights. More specific options can be thought of, especially for the partial opening up after the lockdown. So how do you make sure that people who have to quarantine remain there? How do you ensure that people? So there's lots of different options there. You could have bracelets that would monitor where you are, and that can only be activated if you have your phone with you, whereby you can then take a picture and show that it's really you. So the technology is not the issue. The issue is how far do we want to go? But my quick and honest opinion is that we can use technology in efficient ways without giving up. A complete dichotomy, I think, should maybe look further in the technologies available and understand that it can be done. It's just a matter of doing it. And now lots of countries are having open calls for applications for companies who have been developing these solutions. The problem is the deployment. It's not, as I said, it's not technology, it's how you deploy it, and whether you deploy it everywhere, whether different areas with more cases should be treated differently, etc. So it's again, as we've been saying for the past hour, more of a political hurdle than an economic in the previous case, or a technology case in this one.
I'd love to hear you going on about that. That's very fascinating, really. And we could have a whole episode about this, but we need to go on. We now have 10 minutes to the finish line. So I'm going to ask last question to Paolo. Then we have two more directed to everybody. Well, I will ask you to do a quick round of table, or to pick up the question you prefer to reply. So Paolo, question for you again. How high is the risk that the European Green New Deal will be downplayed to overcome this crisis? Very, very interesting question, in my opinion. I would have done that.
Yes, this is somehow related to what I was saying, no? Like the New Deal to transform our economy in a sustainable economy was at its very, very beginning. So the discussion was open, some money was found. Van der Leyen seems to be interested in going in that direction, but it was clear that a much bigger effort was needed in order to really change the speed of the transition that we all need to do, and do it fast. And we can see in this crisis an opportunity to speed up the process. And so we should, I think, fight and press politicians in order to take this opportunity that we do have to mobilize money and to use it properly, or as was asking the question may fear, there is the possibility of a massive downplay of the program. And that would be really a disaster, because COVID-19 is only one of the many possible shocks that will arrive if we don't change our world and make it a little substantially more sustainable and a little socially more sustainable.
Thank you very much, Paolo. Just a spoiler alert for all the Italian listening to this, we're going to have a debate about that precisely next week. I have less than 10 minutes now with all of you. So we have 3 questions coming up directed to everybody. So I'm going to read this for you. Whoever wants to reply, just unmute yourself and decide if that's the question you want to reply to. So first would be, can you talk about the approach of Taiwan? Why isn't any European country trying to do it like Taiwan? They didn't lock the country of 20 million people and contain the contagious 230 cases and 2 deaths. So that's the first question about the Asian approach. Second question, is it possible to activate the European stability mechanism with such a light fiscal supervision that practically it would be Eurobonds in everything but name? Third question, I'm reading all of them. The speakers can see this in our chat, so then you tell me which question you want to reply to. In a week, when we marked 25 years of Schengen, does the panel see the current border closure as a threat to long-term confidence in the idea of a single market, e.g. for cross-border worker or for transnational supply chains? Whoever wants to reply to whoever question, I will see who unmutes themselves first and give the word to you.
Okay, then.
Please go ahead.
The silence. Well, what can I say about the Taiwanese approach? Nothing, probably, except that I know that they've had a very tough experience with the SARS 2003, I think. So I mean, for what I've heard, this is one of the reasons countries like Taiwan, Korea, and also, but also the Southeast Asia, they were more prepared, and so they acted very early before the spread of the contagion would be so big that even tracking would be almost useless. And regarding the second one on ESM, I think that if it will be activated with the light supervision, that's probably the exact reason why Eurobonds. That's probably why it is better to devise a different instrument for this, very particular for the very particular circumstance that we are going through. Like the ESM was devised to deal with crises such as the 2011 one. So where there is when there is a crisis of confidence over the sovereign debt of one of the euro area member, and probably it should be left as it is, at least for now, and instead should be devised another instrument to deal with the corona crisis. This is my opinion on this. And I mean, about Schengen, I don't know. I think I would leave it to others.
I can go second.
Please go ahead.
So I would second. I think that the Taiwanese approach was already dealt with what Giulia said. So I think it's a political problem. So we have a lot of ways to maybe introduce other things. They have, I think, already been discussed in Italy as well. It's just difficult to implement them because there are some worries about privacy and security, which, as I completely agree with Giulia, can be overcome if we want to. For the second question, is it possible to activate the ESM mechanism in light fiscal supervision? Well, you have to change the ESM mechanism to the point where it is not the ESM mechanism anymore. So why do that? That is a useful instrument for specific reasons. and when you can activate new instruments, which almost everyone, even economists in Germany, even economists in the Netherlands, even the Dutch central banker agree that we need an instrument similar to the Eurobond and not to change the ESM right now, because the ESM, it has two problems. One is the fiscal supervision, which, okay, we can change, but there is a second one. Because the ESM intervenes normally when the country has difficulty financing itself in the market, it already brings, whether we want it or not, some moral judgment from the countries who are not using it. So this is not the moment. I know that is a small difference, but having the moral judgment in this moment, it hides. It can hide inside some, let's say, I will be blunt here, racist judgment about what some countries are doing and what some other countries are doing. All countries in Europe have in a moment or another broken some European roles. So let's not focus all the time on these minutiae. The Netherlands has broken its roles, keeping the taxes very low. Germany has broken its laws by exporting too much, European laws by exporting too much. So every country in its own way breaks European laws. So let's find an instrument together, and that will help us overcome the crisis. On the last point, I think it's too early to say, because it absolutely depends on our response. If we have a coordinated response, as Giulia was saying before, if we manage to have the openings together, if we manage to use our supply chains, for instance, to help each other with having the masks, with having the respiratory instruments, etc., it can actually be a boost for the future to the supply chains. If we act as we have been done so far, with no coordination, yes, I absolutely agree that it can go back. Thanks.
Can I try and tackle the Taiwan and Schengen together? The reason being, yeah, it seems weird, but the reason being, so Taiwan wasn't so much about technology in terms of new apps or whatever. There was also that, but I think the main reason for their success was, apart from the fact that they were prepared and they were worried and therefore they acted quickly, but also they had combined public databases in terms of national health insurance, immigrations, customs, etc. So they were able to track and predict and just make sure that they kept monitoring the population, and they were much less squeamish about checking people's temperatures at airports. They were much quicker in closing borders. Why is it linked to the question about Schengen? Because right before the crisis started, the European Commission had issued its data strategy, where precisely they were asking to pool health data together as the first key area where data should be pooled. Why is that important? Because that, if we had that combined maybe with other data, we could have had a much more coordinated reaction. As soon as the first cases were identified, we could have done more. To the fact that the databases within Europe are all separated and non-interoperable, also from a technological point of view, is part of the problem why there couldn't be any immediate technology response, as well as cultural resistance. I think linked to the fact that we're so used to having freedom and moving around, I think there's a lot of resistance from being checked at borders and tracked and all the rest of it. So the two are combined.
Totally agree with you. Paolo, you're the last. You can close the debate today. You want to reply perhaps to some of the questions we've been asked? You're on mute, Paolo. If you're speaking, we cannot hear you.
Sorry, I think so. The answer that were given were very convincing, and I think I don't have much to add on this. What I would like to stress again is that whatever is the action that we decide to take, whether we decide to go with the European mechanism or whether we decide to do something else, the problem with treaties will be there. Because, for example, European Central Bank, in theory, cannot by the national debts as it should do, should start doing if we decide that this is the way. We have to fix this in some way. I think we are, as citizens, we are accepting incredible restrictions of our freedoms. We are even considering to implement really KGB-like surveillance on people. So I think we should also consider non-conventional tools to change treaties, and we should implement them. So in a time of emergency, I think that we should definitely choose a strategy and act as quick as possible.
Thank you very much, Paolo. I think this is the time for unconventional measures and unconventional replies to an unconventional crisis that we really did not expect it to see in the modern times. So we are 2 minutes late to the end of our debate, which in Italy means we are very much on time. I want to thank, of course, all the guests we had today. Again, Giulia Pastorella, Paolo Brunori, Pietro Panizza, and Andi Shehu. Thank you very much for this very lively and interesting debate. We were live also on Volta Europa Facebook page, and we will be online also next Sunday, but at a different time. We'll let you know. Speakers, it's been great to have you. Thanks again.
Thank you very much.
I want to thank, in the last 30 seconds, the team who has worked with me on this, my team, my very special team. It's Pietro Massai, Giovanni Cannizzo, Lorenzo Stefani, Alessandro Mileti, Ginevra Detti, Gabriele Maone, Giorgio Tosco. Thank you for being the best team I could ever imagine. And of course, to all of you who have been listening to this, we'll be in touch on social media. Stay safe and spread positivity. Good night.
Good night, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.